The hangar was alive with the metallic clatter of tools, the low hum of hydraulic lifts, and the occasional barked order of crew chiefs trying to wring every ounce of readiness from machines built for war. Among the organized chaos stood Captain James Rourke, the Apache pilot who had flown more sorties than he could count, his calloused hands resting on his flight helmet as his sharp eyes scanned the scene. The mission brief had been clear. Tonight, they were flying into the disputed valley where insurgents had fortified their positions, and every detail of preparation mattered. His crew knew each weapon system like a heartbeat, but today a new face was among them, someone the others assumed was just another mechanic, a junior soldier assigned to load the rockets and ammunition. She was slight, her frame lean but wiry, moving with quick efficiency as she checked the Hellfire racks, her fingers tightening bolts with a speed that suggested she had done this more times than anyone gave her credit for. Rourke noticed the silence around her. Unlike the others, she didn't joke, didn't trade insults, didn't even look up when voices called her name. She was a ghost moving through the machinery and the crew didn't mind. To them, she was just another pair of hands keeping the bird ready. But Rourke's instincts, sharpened by years of combat, caught the detail that others ignored. The way she moved was too precise, her eyes scanning not just the hardware but the whole hangar, as if calculating exits, threats, vulnerabilities. He filed the thought away, brushing it off as paranoia, until the moment that changed everything. She bent down to slide a missile into its cradle, and for the first time the sleeve of her fatigues rolled back, exposing the skin of her forearm. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the ink of a tattoo glinted faintly, its lines sharp, intricate, and immediately out of place. Rourke's breath caught in his throat. He had seen that mark before years ago, during an operation buried in classified files. The tattoo was not some casual design, not the kind of ink soldiers picked up on drunken weekends. It was a sigil, black serpents twisted around a crimson blade, an emblem known only to a handful of operators in the shadow world of Black Ops. It had belonged to the Ghost Vipers, an unofficial unit that the Pentagon denied existed, a team so deep in the covert layers that even mentioning their name in open air was forbidden. Most believed the Vipers had been wiped out during a disastrous mission in the Hindu Kush, their bodies lost to the mountains. But here it was, etched into the arm of a woman no one had noticed until now. Rourke froze, his eyes locked on the ink, memories slamming into him like rotor blades. He remembered the classified photos, the blood-soaked reports, the whispers in briefing rooms that the Vipers had not died but vanished. And now, inexplicably, one of them was here, loading his Apache as if she were just another mechanic. His throat tightened, and before he could stop himself, a gasp escaped his lips, sharp and audible in the cavernous hangar. The sound was small but it carried. She glanced up instantly, her gaze meeting his with eyes that were colder, sharper than he had ever seen. It was the kind of look that pierced through the mask of routine and told him that she knew exactly what he had seen, exactly what it meant. The air between them tightened, charged with an unspoken recognition. She lowered her sleeve casually as if nothing had happened, and returned to her work with the same mechanical precision, but the illusion had already shattered. Rourke felt the weight of invisible threads tightening around him, a web of secrets he had stumbled into by accident. His pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to ask, to confront her, but the words refused to form. Around them, the crew kept working, oblivious, laughing about ration coffee and broken hydraulics, their world unshaken by the revelation. Only he carried the sudden burden of knowledge, and it pressed on him like a stone. He forced himself to breathe, to look away, to act as if nothing had happened, but his mind was already spiraling, grasping at the fragments of rumors about the Vipers. If she was one of them, then she wasn't here by coincidence. And if she wasn't here by coincidence, then his mission tonight was about far more than rockets and coordinates. The minutes crawled. She finished the last of her checks, closed the panels, and signed off the maintenance sheet with a name that looked almost too plain, too ordinary, Private Collins. He almost laughed at the absurdity. Collins was not her name. Of that he was certain. Ghost Vipers never used their real names. They erased them, became shadows, became myths. He wanted to call her out, to demand the truth, but something in her eyes had warned him, stay quiet or regret it. So he stayed silent, watching as she vanished into the hangar's background once more, her presence swallowed by the grind of engines and the scent of fuel. Yet the image of that tattoo burned in his mind, impossible to ignore, a brand of death and secrets carved into her skin. He knew the night's mission would not go as briefed. Nothing ever did when the shadows crept out of the past. And now one of those shadows was standing less than 10 feet from his helicopter, holding a truth that could upend everything, The mission briefing room smelled faintly of coffee gone stale and dry marker ink from hastily written maps on the whiteboard. Rourke sat at the long metal table with his co-pilot, Lieutenant Harris, and a handful of squad leaders, pretending to study the terrain overlays projected on the wall. But his thoughts were elsewhere, spiraling back to the ink he had seen on her arm, the serpent wound around a blade. Every time the colonel spoke, the words dissolved before they reached him, drowned by the whisper of his memory. Ghost vipers don't exist. Ghost vipers are dead. And yet he had seen one. Harris elbowed him, murmuring, "You awake, Captain? Looks like you're staring through the wall." Rourke forced a grin, muttered something about thinking through ingress angles, and bent his head over the notes. He couldn't share what he had seen, not even with Harris, who had flown by his side through firestorms. This was beyond loyalty, beyond friendship. If he said a word, they'd brand him paranoid at best, compromised at worst. He had to hold it inside, a poison he alone could swallow. When the briefing ended, the pilots dispersed to prep their crews, voices low with anticipation. Rourke lingered, letting the others leave before him, staring at the glowing valley on the screen where their mission target blinked red. Destroy insurgent stockpiles. Suppress fortified positions. Return at dawn. Simple words for a plan that would end in fire and blood. As he walked out, the hangar was quieter than before, the roar of engines reduced to a murmur. She was still there, sitting on a crate near the tools, her posture too relaxed, as though she had all the time in the world. Their eyes met again, and this time she didn't look away. "You saw it," she said softly, her voice cutting through the hum of machinery, low enough that only he could hear. Rourke froze, heart hammering. She didn't move, didn't even shift her weight, but her words pressed into him like a blade. "I don't know what you're talking about," he managed, his tone clipped, but the denial sounded hollow in his own ears. A faint curve touched her lips, not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one. "Good. Keep it that way." He wanted to demand answers, to drag the truth out of her right there, but she stood and moved past him with the casual grace of someone who had already chosen her place in the game. The faint scent of oil and dust clung to her fatigues as she brushed by. Rourke's hand twitched as if he could reach out, stop her, hold her there until she spoke. But instinct screamed at him not to. She vanished behind the line of armored vehicles, leaving him with nothing but the pounding of his pulse. Harris approached a moment later, holding a flight manifest. "We're wheels up in 20. You good?" Rourke nodded too quickly, slipping into the familiar mask of command. "Yeah. Let's get the bird hot." The lie settled bitterly on his tongue, but there was no time left for questions. Minutes later, the Apache's twin rotors thundered into the desert night, blades carving the darkness as the machine lifted off the pad. Rourke's hands gripped the cyclic and collective with practiced precision, the vibration of the engines settling into his bones like an old rhythm. Harris chattered over comms, checking systems, while the convoy of armored vehicles rolled below. The valley lay ahead, a shadowed scar between mountains, waiting to swallow them whole. For a time, the mission consumed him, numbers and bearings anchoring him in the present. But when his gaze flicked toward the ground convoy, he caught sight of her again, standing on the back of a transport truck, helmet strapped tight, eyes scanning the horizon. Not a mechanic now, not a loader, but geared for combat. The sight jolted him. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had slipped into the operation like smoke and no one questioned it. Rourke clenched his jaw, adjusting altitude, but his mind churned. If she was on this mission, then the night's objective was not what they had been told. The valley mouth opened before them, jagged cliffs rising like teeth on either side. Insurgent fire flared from the ridges, tracer rounds carving red arcs into the night. Harris cursed, fingers flying over controls as countermeasures deployed. Rourke banked hard, hellfires locking onto hidden bunkers, rockets streaking out in brilliant trails of fire. Explosions rippled through the dark, shaking the earth. Below, the convoy spread out, armored turrets barking in response. Amid the chaos, his eyes searched instinctively for her. Through the smoke and muzzle flashes, he caught a glimpse of her moving with terrifying precision, weaving through the battlefield as if she had mapped every bullet before it was fired. She wasn't just fighting, she was directing, signaling soldiers, shifting them like chess pieces into positions that blunted the ambush before it could tighten. Harris was shouting coordinates, alarms screamed in the cockpit, but Rourke couldn't pull his gaze away. She was no ordinary soldier. She was the storm inside the storm, the hidden blade that turned the tide. And as he loosed another volley of rockets into the ridge, he realized the truth settling in his gut. Their mission had never been about destroying stockpiles. It was about her. The battlefield erupted into a chaos that seemed almost choreographed, each explosion a beat in a deadly rhythm. Rourke had flown countless missions, seen firestorms that could reduce entire compounds to rubble, but tonight felt different, as if some unseen hand was scripting every move. His Apache skimmed low over the valley floor, hellfire streaking into rocky outcroppings where insurgents hid. Each impact illuminated the cliffs with bursts of orange fire, smoke curling like claws into the sky. Harris kept up a stream of clipped updates, rattling off enemy positions, but Rourke's focus kept drifting toward the convoy below, where she moved like a phantom among the chaos. Soldiers hunkered behind cover, machine guns roared, and yet she advanced, calm, deliberate, her rifle snapping in quick bursts that dropped threats before they even fully revealed themselves. She was leading, though no rank insignia marked her for it, and the men around her responded instinctively, shifting with her hand signals, trusting her presence as if she were born to command. Rourke realized the convoy wasn't surviving by chance, it was surviving because of her. A missile streaked toward his bird, a heat seeker fired from the ridge. Warnings blared in his headset, and he banked hard, chaff blooming in a burst of silver. The missile arced away, detonating harmlessly in the night, but the close call sent his heart hammering. He snapped the Apache back on target, launching a counterstrike that shredded the launch site into rubble. The cockpit shook with the echo of the blast, and Harris muttered curses under his breath. "They're better armed than Intel said," Harris growled. "This isn't just a stockpile, it's a fortress." Rourke wanted to answer, but his words stalled. He already knew. He'd known the moment he saw her tattoo. This wasn't about stockpiles or fortifications. This was about drawing out something buried deep, something the command had deliberately kept from them. And she was the key. On the ground, the convoy pressed forward, the valley narrowing into a choke point that funneled them into enemy fire. Rourke's instincts screamed that it was a trap, but she was already moving before the danger fully revealed itself. He saw her break from cover, sprinting across open ground with a boldness that would have been suicidal for anyone else. A flare lit the sky, and for an instant, the tattoo on her forearm gleamed again as she raised her weapon, signaling with a flash of her hand. Mortar fire thundered down on the spot where the convoy had been seconds earlier, but because of her signal, the soldiers had already shifted. They survived because she knew where the strike would land before it came. Rourke's chest tightened as realization took hold. She wasn't just fighting, she was predicting. Every move, every strike, every ambush, they unfolded as if she had seen them long before. It wasn't luck. It wasn't instinct. It was knowledge. The Apache roared overhead, cutting down suppressive fire with its chain gun. Rourke's mind churned, fighting to reconcile the impossible. She wasn't supposed to exist, and yet here she was, moving like a ghost through the valley. Memories clawed at him. Fragments of classified briefings, rumors of experiments, whispers that the Ghost Vipers hadn't just been special operators but something more. Soldiers trained beyond the edge of human endurance, given information others couldn't access. Some said they were broken, others said enhanced, but none had lived to confirm. Until now. His gut clenched as he banked the helicopter again, eyes darting back to her form amid the fire. She was the proof of a secret that should have stayed buried, and somehow she had been dropped into his mission without explanation. Harris's voice cracked through his headset. "Captain, eyes front, we've got another wave coming in hot." Rourke snapped his focus back, rockets primed, as insurgents poured from hidden tunnels in the cliffs. The valley flared alive with fire once more. He unleashed a storm of munitions, hammering the enemy into the dust, but even as explosions tore through the night, his thoughts kept circling back to her. She had known where the mortar would hit. She had guided the convoy through the ambush. And most of all, she had carried the serpent and blade mark that tied her to the unit officially erased from history. Below, she pressed forward with her squad, breaching the choke point. For a heartbeat, Rourke lost sight of her in the smoke, panic rising unbidden in his chest. Then she reappeared atop a ridge, hauling herself up with effortless speed, rifle slung as she drew a blade from her side. The sight of it jolted him. It wasn't a standard-issue combat knife but a weapon forged in the same design as her tattoo, the same blade wrapped in serpents. It caught the light as she raised it high, signaling like a banner. The troops below surged forward, emboldened by her presence, cutting through the enemy with renewed force. And in that moment Rourke understood. She wasn't just part of the mission. She was the mission. Everything else, the stockpiles, the bunkers, the valley, was cover. Command had sent them here not to destroy insurgents, but to unleash her. Rourke's grip tightened on the controls until his knuckles whitened. The realization left him shaken, his trust in the mission fractured. They had lied to him, to Harris, to every soldier fighting on the ground. The real war wasn't against the insurgents. It was against the truth. He watched her cut down another wave of fighters, the serpent blade flashing, and a chill spread through him. Because if Command had resurrected the Ghost Vipers, then this wasn't just a mission. It was the beginning of something far darker, something they had no idea they were part of. And he, by accident, had become a witness they might not allow to live. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though Rourke's clock showed only minutes ticking by. The Apache's ammunition counters were running low, warning lights flashing on the panels, but the convoy had pushed through the choke point and into the deeper part of the valley. Smoke hung thick in the air, turning the stars into faint smudges. Rourke circled above, buying the ground team's room to maneuver, when the order came over comms: "Hold position. Await further instructions." The words were clipped, cold, from Command back at base. Harris frowned, glancing at him. Hold position? In the middle of a kill box? That's suicide. Rourke felt the same chill. Orders rarely came that vague, and never at such a dangerous moment. His instincts screamed that something larger was at play. He adjusted their altitude, scanning the valley floor until he found her again. She was no longer moving with the squad. She had separated, slipping into the shadows along the cliffside, as if guided by a plan invisible to everyone else. The soldiers below fought on, unaware that their survival hinged on someone no one had officially acknowledged. He tracked her through the cockpit glass as she scaled a jagged rise with a speed that betrayed years of brutal training. Once on the ridge, she crouched low, pulling a device from her pack. A beacon, small, black, its light pulsing faintly. She planted it on the rock, shielded by smoke, before vanishing deeper into the darkness. Rourke's pulse spiked. He recognized the device. It wasn't for navigation or targeting. It was for extraction. She wasn't just fighting her way through the valley, she was calling something in. He wanted to tell Harris to radio Command, but he bit down on the urge. If Command had known about this from the start, then alerting them could put him directly in their sights. And if they didn't know, if she was acting off-grid, then revealing it might doom them all. Either way, he was already in too deep. Below, Harris cursed as the convoy stalled. Insurgents had regrouped, pressing from both flanks with heavy fire. Rourke dropped altitude, chain gun roaring as he cleared a path. Yet even as he fought, his eyes kept searching the ridge. She reappeared, sliding down the rocks with impossible agility, moving closer to the heart of the valley where an abandoned compound stood in ruin. The compound wasn't on their briefing maps. It was old, its walls crumbling, but something about the way she approached it told Rourke it was her true destination. Every step of this mission was built around her reaching that place. He couldn't prove it, but he felt it in his bones. And when she slipped through the shattered archway of the compound, his gut twisted with the certainty that everything was about to change. Inside the cockpit, Harris muttered, "We're burning fuel fast, Captain. If Command wants us to sit tight, we're sitting ducks." Rourke hesitated, weighing his options, then keyed the mic. "Command, this is Rourke. What's the purpose of the hold order?" "Over." The reply came back after a long pause. "Too long. Maintain position. Do not engage further unless fired upon." "That's an order." The flatness of the voice unsettled him. It was the kind of tone used when someone was hiding the real plan. Harris gave him a sharp look. "They're hanging us out here. You feel it too, don't you?" Rourke didn't answer. He was watching the compound. The walls flickered with light for a moment, like a signal from within, before fading again. His chest tightened. She wasn't just raiding the compound. She was activating something. Minutes dragged like hours as the fight below grew bloodier. Soldiers shouted, bullets hammered the cliffs, and the Apache shuddered with each burst of fire it unleashed. Through it all, Rourke's gaze locked on the compound. Finally, movement. She emerged from the shadows again, but she wasn't alone. Two figures stumbled behind her, bound, hands tied, faces gaunt. Prisoners. She had gone into the ruin to pull them out. Even from the sky, Rourke could see the way she guided them, steady, protective as gunfire crackled around her. These weren't random hostages. No, these were the reason Command had lied. The realization slammed into him. This entire operation was a cover to extract people hidden deep within enemy territory, people too important to admit existed. And she had been the blade to cut them free. Harris swore under his breath. "Who the hell are they?" "That's not in the brief." Rourke didn't respond. His mind raced as the pieces fell together. If she was one of the Ghost Vipers, then her presence meant the prisoners mattered on a scale far above their pay grade. Politicians, intelligence assets, maybe even defectors. Whatever the truth, it was enough for command to risk an entire battalion just to cover her tracks. And if Rourke had seen her tattoo, if he had glimpsed what was never meant to be seen, then he was already compromised. The thought chilled him. His career, his freedom, maybe even his life, might now depend on whether he kept his mouth shut. He banked the Apache low, unleashing one last storm of fire to clear her path as she guided the prisoners back toward the convoy. Her eyes flicked up, catching sight of his bird for a heartbeat, and in that brief connection he read the unspoken truth. She knew he had seen too much. And he knew she wouldn't let him walk away untouched. The night sky throbbed with the rhythm of rotors, the valley burning below, but inside Rourke's chest it felt like the real battle had only just begun. Because the mission was almost over, yet the war between secrets and survival was only starting, and he was trapped at its center. The valley had fallen into a tense rhythm of retreat and suppression fire. The insurgent waves had thinned, though pockets of resistance still barked sporadic rounds. Into the darkness, the convoy pulled into a defensive circle, armored vehicles forming a steel barrier while medics rushed to the wounded. Rourke's Apache hovered low, engines thundering, providing overwatch. The adrenaline from the battle still pulsed in his blood, but his eyes were fixed on her. She stood near the prisoners she had dragged from the ruins, her posture calm despite the chaos. The soldiers around her didn't question her presence. They treated her as if she had always belonged, as if her silent authority was natural. No one asked who she was, no one wondered why a supposed mechanic had turned into a phantom leader in the middle of hell. Only Rourke carried that weight, because only he had seen the mark burned into her skin. Harris unbuckled slightly, stretching his stiff arms, muttering through the comms. "We're near bingo fuel, Captain. We've got maybe 20 minutes before we've got to peel off or we won't make it back." Rourke nodded, his hands tight on the controls. The order to hold still burned in his mind. They should have been halfway home already, but command hadn't called extraction. Not yet. He scanned the horizon, searching for the glow of inbound aircraft, but the night was empty save for smoke and stars. "Command, this is Rourke, request status on exfil. We're low fuel and hot zone still active." "Over." Silence followed, heavy, oppressive. Finally, a voice crackled back, different this time, colder than before. "Hold your position, Captain. Reinforcements inbound. Maintain overwatch." Rourke's jaw clenched. Reinforcements? That wasn't extraction. That was delay. And delay in a valley like this meant one thing: there was more to the mission they hadn't told him. He brought the bird lower, circling until he could see her face in the dim glow of fires below. She looked up, her eyes locking on his cockpit with unnerving steadiness, and lifted a hand in a subtle gesture. "Wait." The message was clear, though her lips never moved. Rourke's chest tightened. She wasn't just moving on instinct, she was anticipating command, reading the situation in ways he couldn't. For the first time in his career, he felt less like the pilot in control and more like a pawn circling a board he didn't understand. Harris was still talking, his voice edged with impatience. "Captain, something's off. I don't like this. If reinforcements were inbound, we'd have radar contacts. We've got nothing. Just ghosts." The word ghosts cut into Rourke like a blade. Ghosts. Ghost vipers. The past refusing to stay buried. He didn't answer Harris. His gaze stayed on her, and the gnawing suspicion in his gut solidified into something colder. The prisoners she had freed were being ushered into an armored transport. One was barely able to walk, supported under both arms, but the other moved with surprising strength despite the restraints. Rourke narrowed his eyes. Even at this distance he recognized the bearing of someone trained, military, intelligence, something beyond a civilian. Whoever they weren't ordinary hostages. The pieces clicked harder into place. She hadn't been sent here just to fight or lead. She had been sent to recover these people. And their importance was high enough to justify lies, manipulated soldiers, and a valley full of blood. Rourke's skin prickled with unease. He couldn't tell if she was saving them, or escorting them into a different kind of prison. The order came again through his headset, abrupt and sharp. "Captain Rourke, disengage from convoy, hold pattern north of valley." "Acknowledge." Harris whipped his head around, confusion written on his face. "Disengage? What the hell?" "The convoy still needs cover." Rourke didn't reply right away. His mind whirred. They were pulling him away. Removing his eyes from the convoy. Removing him from her. It wasn't about fuel, it wasn't about risk. They didn't want him to see what came next. Slowly he pressed the transmit key. "Command, negative on disengage. Holding position until convoy clears." "Over." The silence that followed was suffocating. When the reply came, it wasn't an order. It was a warning. Captain, you will comply. Harris stared at him wide-eyed. They're serious, James? They'll burn you for this. Rourke didn't answer. His gaze was locked on her, on the way she moved to the transport carrying the prisoners. She climbed aboard with them, her rifle slung, her expression unreadable. The engine roared, and the vehicle pulled into position, heading for the far end of the valley where the terrain dipped into a hidden pass. Not toward the extraction point he had been briefed. Somewhere else. Somewhere command hadn't mentioned. Rourke felt his chest tighten. If he let her slip away now, the truth would vanish with her, buried beneath official reports and classified files. He couldn't let that happen. Not after what he had seen. He banked the Apache lower, engines growling as he tailed the transport from above. Harris cursed, grabbing the side handle. What are you doing, Captain? That's not our vector. Rourke's voice was steel. We're staying on them. I don't care what command says. Harris opened his mouth to argue, but one look at Rourke's face silenced him. They both knew this wasn't just disobedience. It was betrayal of the chain of command. And yet, Rourke couldn't shake the truth pressing on him. This wasn't about insurgents anymore. This was about shadows moving pieces across a board they weren't supposed to see. And she was at the center of it. The transport rolled toward the hidden pass, its headlights cutting through smoke. She stood at the rear hatch, hand braced on the frame, eyes once again finding his bird in the sky above. No fear. No surprise. Only recognition and something else, acceptance. As if she had always known he would defy orders, that he would follow her no matter the cost. Rourke's stomach twisted. He realized then that every step of the night, every choice he had made, might have been part of her plan. And if that was true, then he was no longer the hunter. He was the one being led. The hidden pass wound like a scar through the valley's far side, narrow and jagged, its walls rising into shadows that swallowed even the faint starlight. Rourke kept the Apache hovering above, rotors chopping the silence, his eyes locked on the transport below as it rumbled forward with the prisoners inside. Every instinct told him this was where the real mission began, the one no one had spoken about in any briefing room. Harris fidgeted in the co-pilot's seat, his voice sharp with unease. James, this is insane. We're running fumes. Command's already flagged us. You keep this up and we'll be grounded, if we make it back at all. Rourke's jaw clenched, his gaze never wavering. We're not leaving until I see where they're taking them. Harris exhaled harshly, muttering something under his breath, but he didn't press further. He knew Rourke well enough to recognize when an order wouldn't bend. The convoy slowed as the terrain grew rougher. Soldiers dismounted, spreading into defensive positions, their rifles sweeping the rocks. It was too organized, too prepared to be a simple movement through hostile territory. Rourke leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Then he saw her. She climbed out of the transport, boots crunching against gravel, her figure silhouetted against the headlights. Even from the sky, her movements carried the same precise control, deliberate, unwavering. She gestured toward a cleft in the rock, and the soldiers obeyed without hesitation, guiding the prisoners into the shadows of the pass. Not a single man questioned her authority. Not a single voice asked who she was. They moved as if she were invisible and yet in complete command, a paradox only someone like her could create. Rourke's mind spun. She wasn't operating under command's radar, she was operating with their blessing. They had woven her into the mission so seamlessly that no one questioned her presence. She was both ghost and commander, erased from records yet obeyed on instinct. But why the secrecy? Why hide her existence even from the pilots risking their lives in the same mission? His gaze drifted to the prisoners as they vanished into the cleft. One stumbled, nearly collapsing, and she steadied him with surprising care, her hand briefly brushing his shoulder. For an instant, the hard mask she wore cracked, and Rourke saw something human beneath, a flicker of recognition, of loyalty, maybe even guilt. Then it was gone, replaced by the same cold efficiency. Captain, Harris said, voice tense, we can't hover here much longer. We'll burn the rest of our reserves. Rourke's hands flexed on the controls. He could let them disappear into the rocks and return home ignorant, safe. Or he could break the final line, force himself into the shadows they had tried to keep from him. The choice wasn't really a choice. He lowered the Apache, the skids kicking up dust as he set down near the edge of the pass. Harris cursed, yanking off his helmet. You're out of your mind. They'll court-martial you for this. Rourke powered down the rotors, unstrapped, and grabbed his sidearm. Stay with the bird. If I'm not back in 15, take off and don't look back. Harris stared at him, torn between anger and loyalty, then nodded. 15. Don't make me leave you. Rourke stepped into the night, the sudden silence after the engines deafening. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and smoke. He moved quickly, boots crunching softly against gravel, keeping to the shadows as he followed the glow of distant lights deeper into the pass. The rock walls pressed close on either side, funneling him toward the cleft where she and the prisoners had gone. His heart hammered, each step echoing with the weight of betrayal, duty, and curiosity. The deeper he went, the clearer the sounds became, low voices, the shuffle of boots, the clank of equipment. And then, unmistakably, her voice. Calm, precise, issuing orders like a conductor guiding an orchestra. He edged closer, peering around a jagged outcrop. The soldiers had formed a perimeter while she stood at the center, the prisoners kneeling before her. A portable transmitter sat on the ground, its antenna rising like a spine of metal. She was speaking into it, her tone clipped. Package secure. Awaiting confirmation. A pause, then a reply crackled faintly, words he couldn't make out. She nodded once, then crouched before the prisoners. You're not out yet. Keep your heads down until the next wave arrives. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it carried authority that brooked no argument. Rourke's pulse spiked. Package secure. Next wave. This wasn't just an extraction, it was a handoff. And whatever side of the board she played for, it wasn't the one he thought. He shifted, a pebble sliding loose under his boot. Her head snapped up instantly. Eyes like ice locked onto the shadows where he crouched. For a heartbeat, silence. Then her voice, steady and unflinching. Captain Rourke. You should have left when you had the chance. The soldiers turned, weapons raising, but she lifted a hand, stopping them. Her gaze never left his. Slowly, deliberately, she rose, stepping away from the prisoners and into the dim glow of the headlights. Rourke straightened, stepping from cover, his weapon drawn but lowered, his throat dry. Who are you? He demanded, his voice harsher than he intended. The faintest curve touched her lips, neither smile nor sneer. The question isn't who I am. It's why you're still here. For a moment, the night held its breath. Rourke's finger twitched on his sidearm, but he knew firing wasn't an option. She had the soldiers, the ground, and the truth on her side. Yet he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after seeing her tattoo, her blade, her command. He swallowed hard, his voice dropping low. You're one of them. Ghost Vipers. They said you were all dead. Her eyes flickered, the first crack in her mask. Maybe we were. But death is just another cover story, isn't it? The soldiers shifted uneasily at the edges of the pass, their rifles steady but their eyes flicking between her and Rourke. The air pulsed with tension, heavy enough to choke. Rourke kept his sidearm steady in his grip, though he knew the odds were impossible. One wrong twitch and he'd be gunned down before he could pull the trigger. But it wasn't fear that burned in his chest. It was anger, confusion, and the gnawing demand for answers. He stepped closer, his boots crunching the gravel beneath him. Why keep it secret? Why hide behind lies and dead men's names? His voice carried, harsher than he intended, echoing off the stone walls. My crew bled tonight. Men died thinking they were hitting stockpiles. But this wasn't about stockpiles, was it? This was about them. He gestured toward the prisoners, still kneeling in the dust. Her expression didn't change, though her eyes sharpened as though she were weighing how much truth he could bear. Finally she spoke, her tone low and deliberate. Those men down there, your soldiers, your crew, they were told what they needed to know. Nothing more. That's how wars are won. She paused, her gaze never leaving his. You're right, Captain. The brief was a lie. The insurgents were only noise. The real mission was recovery. She tilted her head slightly toward the prisoners. And what we pulled out of that ruin is worth more than all the ordnance you dropped tonight. Rourke's grip tightened on his weapon, frustration surging. Worth more? Worth lying to us? Worth feeding good men into a meat grinder just to cover a secret op? He took another step forward, his voice rising. Damn it, I saw the tattoo. I know what you are. Ghost Vipers were supposed to be gone. Buried. The words hung in the night like a flare. The soldiers stiffened but didn't move, their faces expressionless. She, however, stilled completely. For the first time, something flickered across her mask of composure. Something sharp, almost vulnerable. You know too much, she said quietly. The words weren't a threat, they were a fact. She studied him, her head tilting slightly, as if she could peel back the layers of his mind. But you don't know enough. You think Ghost Vipers were soldiers. That's only half the truth. We weren't just trained for war. We were built for it. Reshaped. Used. Her voice hardened, cutting through the dark. And when the program burned too hot, when the price became too ugly for the politicians to stomach, they declared us dead. Easier to bury ghosts than admit monsters. Rourke felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had suspected, but hearing it in her voice drove the truth like a blade into his chest. So you're telling me they made you? They broke you down and rebuilt you like some weapon. His words were heavy, his anger tangled with something darker, pity. And now what? They send you back out here to clean up their mess? She gave a faint shake of her head. No. I'm not here for them. Not entirely. Her eyes flicked to the prisoners, then back to him. These men carry information that could ignite something far worse than tonight's battle. Secrets the kind of men in suits will kill thousands to keep. My job wasn't to extract them for the brass. It was to keep them alive long enough for the truth to see daylight. The words hung in the air like a spark before dry tinder. Rourke blinked, disbelief warring with the memory of her guiding the convoy, predicting enemy fire, moving like she already knew the script. So what does that make you? He asked, his voice rough. A savior? A traitor? Something in between. She stepped closer now, closing the distance until the shadows of her face were carved sharp by the headlights behind her. It makes me someone with nothing left to lose. Someone who knows what they turned us into and refuses to let it stay buried. You think you're fighting a war, Captain? You're not. You're part of a cover-up. His pulse hammered in his ears. He thought of Harris sitting in the cockpit, waiting. He thought of his crew, his men, all the faces that had trusted the mission as it had been briefed. And now, hearing her, he felt the ground shift beneath his boots. If she was telling the truth, then everything he had fought for tonight had been built on lies. He lowered his weapon slightly, his throat tight. If what you're saying is true, then Command already knows you've said too much. They'll erase this entire valley to cover it. For the first time she smiled, not soft, not kind, but sharp and knowing. They'll try. They always do. But they won't erase me, Captain. And now that you've seen, they won't erase you either. She stepped past him, her shoulder brushing his as she moved toward the transport. Soldiers followed her lead, the prisoners rising with them, shuffled back into the armored vehicle. Rourke turned, his weapon still limp at his side, watching as she climbed into the shadows of the hatch. Just before the door closed, she looked back at him. Her eyes locked onto his, steady, unyielding. You can still walk away. Pretend you saw nothing. Fly home, keep your career, your life. Or you can follow and lose everything you thought you knew. The choice is yours, Captain. The hatch slammed shut. The engine roared. Dust swirled in the pass as the transport rumbled deeper into the night, carrying her, the prisoners, and the truth into the dark. Rourke stood frozen, the echo of her words hammering inside him. Walk away or follow. And for the first time in his life, the choice before him felt less like duty and more like fate. Dust hung in the air long after the transport disappeared into the black maw of the pass. The rumble of its engine faded until the silence pressed in on Rourke like a weight. He stood frozen in the shadows, his sidearms slack in his grip, her words echoing in his skull. Walk away or follow. The decision should have been simple. Protocol dictated withdrawal. A pilot did not abandon his crew, his orders, or his chain of command. Walk away, return to base, report what little he could, and let the machine of the military grind forward. That was the safe choice, the sane one. But he felt the truth burrowing into his chest like shrapnel. Safe choices no longer existed. Not after he had seen the mark on her arm. Not after he had heard her admit what she was, what they had made her. He was already compromised. Command would know. Command always knew. If he went back now, the cover story would bury him along with everything else. He holstered his weapon and turned, retracing his steps toward the Apache. Each footfall felt heavier, as if the weight of two futures dragged at his boots. Harris was waiting at the bird, pacing in the dust, his helmet dangling from his hand. When he spotted Rourke, he stormed forward. 15 minutes came and went. What the hell are you doing out here? His eyes searched Rourke's face, reading the turmoil there, but Rourke couldn't form the words. He climbed back into the cockpit, strapping in, avoiding Harris's gaze. The engines whined as he powered up, the rotors screaming back to life. Harris slid into his seat, muttering curses, but he didn't press further. The Apache lifted into the night sky, dust spiraling beneath them, and for a while the only sound was the thrum of the blades and the pounding of Rourke's pulse. The pass stretched below, a vein of darkness winding deeper into the mountains. The transport's lights had vanished, swallowed by the terrain, but Rourke's eyes stayed fixed on the black trail it had taken. Harris broke the silence finally, his voice tight. We're on fumes, Captain. We need to head home now. Rourke didn't answer right away. His hands gripped the controls, his thoughts tearing in two directions. One voice screamed at him to turn back, to live, to bury the night under the lies command would hand them. The other whispered of the tattoo, the blade, the prisoners, proof of a truth the world wasn't supposed to see. He thought of her eyes, steady and unyielding, when she told him he was part of a cover-up. And he knew in his marrow that walking away meant living in chains heavier than any battlefield could bear. He banked the Apache toward the pass. Harris swore, his voice rising. "James, what the hell are you doing? We can't chase them." Command ordered disengage. Rourke's voice came out steady, iron under strain. "If I turn back now, they'll bury us both. You know it. They'll call it pilot error, fuel miscalculation, maybe even desertion. Either way, we're ghosts before sunrise." Harris's protest died on his tongue, his face paling as the truth settled in. He looked out at the darkness, then back at Rourke. "Then what's the plan?" Rourke's eyes stayed on the black line of the pass, the place where shadows swallowed secrets. "We follow. We find out what the hell they're really hiding. And we decide if the world deserves to know." The Apache skimmed low, hugging the cliffs, its engine straining against the last of their fuel. The deeper they went, the tighter the pass grew, until the walls seemed to scrape the wingtips. Then, faintly, the glow of movement flickered ahead. A convoy winding through the rocks. At its heart, the armored transport carrying her and the prisoners. Rourke throttled back, keeping distance, hovering in the blind corners of the terrain. Harris sat rigid, his breathing loud in the headset, but he didn't argue anymore. They were too far gone for second thoughts. Minutes bled into an eternity as they tracked the convoy. Then the pass opened into a hidden plateau, a broad shelf of rock carved by forgotten time. And there, waiting like a predator, was a black aircraft unlike any Rourke had ever seen. Sleek, silent, its angles swallowing moonlight, it perched on the stone like a vulture. Special operations. Black budget. Something pulled from a file he would never be cleared to read. Soldiers moved with precise efficiency, offloading equipment, preparing the plateau for liftoff. The transport pulled alongside and she emerged again, guiding the prisoners toward the waiting craft. Rourke's stomach turned. This wasn't extraction back to base. This was handoff into the deepest dark corners of command, where names and faces ceased to exist.